Alright, so all this talk about rationality makes me want to talk about Gene Gebser. I picked up his book at the library today. I'm starting to move out of my apartment, so I already took most of my books home, and my copy of The Ever-Present Origin was one of those books. I said in a video I just posted that rationality likes to rationalize everything. So it takes other modes of consciousness like the mythic, the magic, uh, the archaic, and rationalizes them. So mythological thinkers, the literalists like uh, Christians or Homeric Greeks who believe that they're, like the stories of the Odyssey and the Iliad are actual truths. They actually occurred. The Bible, all the stories of the Bible actually occurred. That's irrational. It's not rational. But rationality wants to say it's really primitive science. All of these gods are forces of nature that these earlier peoples have personified. Um, and Gene Gebser wants to say that that's not really the case, that it's really each of these stages of evolutionary development are valid stages, they're valid perspectives. And consciousness progresses by mutation. So it's not all rational. It's not this monological, one-layered progression of a single rational consciousness getting smarter and smarter. No, it's an evolution through mutation, which is how evolution occurs. Uh, that's why there's so much diversity and complexity in the natural world. It's not a steady chain. It's it's a global, holistic, sadomasochistic orgy, really. And nature has no idea what it's going to do next, really. It's not an ordered progression. So let's read a little Gebser here. We have been able to show that each consciousness mutation went hand in hand with the gradual strengthening of consciousness, which culminated in the ego consciousness of the mental structure. And the mental structure is the rational structure. It's the enlightenment. It's what we're moving out of now, I think. This increase in consciousness parallels the increase in dimensions, and the dimensions themselves are nothing more than the gradual appearance of everything spatial and temporal. So as the consciousness of human beings has evolved, we've become more and more aware of space and time. And as a result, we become more aware of the dimensionality of space and time. So Gebser's first stage, the archaic, is zero-dimensional. The second stage, the magic, is single-dimensional. It's point-based. The mythic structure is two-point based. It's polar, which is why life and death are sort of one thing. And the mythical structure is very cyclical, and there's no real problems because nothing is disconnected. Then the mental stage is three-dimensional, and that makes it perspectable. Like width and height, it gets depth perception, and it gets a sense of its place in the world. It gets this ego consciousness, this self-centeredness, this I, this perspective of I think, therefore I am. These are all the rational mental structure of consciousness. There is, in other words, a mutual and even an interdependent relationship of consciousness to the spatio-temporal world. To the extent that consciousness is an intensity and is thus intangible, the space-time world represents the corresponding tangible phenomenon as an extensity. The space-time world is the stage, as it were, on which consciousness itself is capable of being actual and efficacious. The reification attendant upon this is evident because the increasing consciousness summons forth an increasing materialization. So Gebser brings up the paradox and paradoxical thinking as sort of an easy way to subvert rational thinking. And he gives the example of Pascal's aphorism, "You would not seek me if you had not found me." Gebser says, this statement contains the very elements we have mentioned. It employs the if, and hence draws an inference, which shows that it belongs to the mental thinking, or the rational structure of consciousness. At the same time, it contains a psychic reversal, since in rational terms the second part is not a result of the first, but rather the opposite. You would not seek me unless you had found me. Despite the irrational element, it nevertheless withstands a determined critique by perspectival or rational thinking, which it takes beyond the fixed perspectival point. So Gebser goes on to talk about Kierkegaard and all of his paradoxes, and he says that paradox, because they can't be disproven by rational thinking, even though they appear contradictory, that they are sort of the fetish of rationality. They're the only connection to mystery and that religious experiential feeling that the mental rational structure of consciousness will allow to seep into its experience of the world. Everything else has to be explained, except paradox, because somehow paradox just subverts the system, and we have to bow down to it somehow, or at least the existentialists seem to feel that way, and they seem like pretty intelligent guys. So Gebser's integral stage of consciousness, or integral structure of consciousness, has a lot to do with coming to be aware of the concrete nature of time, time as it exists objectively and not psychologically or conceptually as a calendar or a clock or past, present, and future. So I'm going to read from this section called Temporics. Temporics is the concern with time. Today this concern is omnipresent. Indeed, it forms the basic concern of our epoch. Everywhere we find attempts to introduce time into our understanding of the world, now that it has been unilaterally spatialized and thus denatured or else completely disregarded. Such temporic attempts are an initial step toward a new, aperspectival world perception. They are an effort to extricate ourselves from mentality, or from the exclusive validity of quantitative thought, which has become deficient in rationality, and a running start toward achieving diaphanuity. So they are an effort to extricate ourselves from mentality and a running start toward achieving diaphanuity. And diaphanuity means transparency, or that they become concrete and you can see them all. You can see them all. It's all crystal clear. Wherever this running start is successful, a man is able to escape from the compulsion of three-dimensional systematization. He supersedes the mental rational structure and mere conceptual time, and transforms the mental rational from a principal component into one which, along with the magic and the mythical, is integrated into diaphanuity. It is possible to aid this process by the concept of acategorical elements, which, as psi stasis, surpass the mere concept of time. This renders perceptible all the aspects that are merely suggested and scarcely recognized in the mentally reduced concept of time. It would show that time is an ever-present abundance or plenitude, that it is spiritual and not psychic in nature. Where such temporic attempts fail, however, the conscious activation of time brings about a disruption in accord with its fragmenting nature. The result is then a negative supersession, and thus a subsession of the mental consciousness structure.